handle the no oxygen thing? Well, many types of bacteria can, many types of archaea, yeast, which is a fungus that could be helpful, like making your bread rise, your muscle cells can, for a while anyway, and these are just a few examples. Now, these organisms handle the lack of oxygen in different ways. Some organisms, such as some types of bacteria or archaea, can do anaerobic respiration. They can continue to perform glycolysis, Krebs, and the electron transport chain, just like aerobic cellular respiration. But since there is no oxygen to be that final electron acceptor at the end of the electron transport chain, they use something else. Sulfate, for example. These organisms are specifically adapted to be able to use a different electron acceptor in this anaerobic respiration. Another option is the organism may just stick with doing glycolysis, which doesn't require oxygen, and then the addition of some way to get their NAD plus back. We'll talk about what that means in a minute. This process is called fermentation, and that's what we're going to focus on. Fermentation is a way to be able to handle the little to no oxygen issue. It allows for glycolysis to happen and for glycolysis to keep going.
Okay, guys. Can you observe this, ya shabab? What is fermentation? It's a process by which glycolysis to happen and for glycolysis to keep going. So when the glycolysis is still happening, okay, it's happening over time. Okay, so what is fermentation? Who can say? Mahmoud Al-Kholi? Abdullah Shinefi?
Yes, sir, it means it allows glycolysis to happen and for glycolysis to keep going.
Excellent. So it's an aerobic process that allow glycolysis to continue. Again, it's an aerobic process. What the meaning of anaerobic يا شباب? أحمد أبو عين?
Yes, mister.
طيب, what is the meaning of anaerobic?
It does not need oxygen.
Excellent, يا أحمد. Excellent. So it's an aerobic process that allow glycolysis to continue. Simply, glycolysis continue, so it is fermentation. Fermentation. In the video here, يا شباب, we watched like some example about like the cells, special types of cells. Not the special types, we have special organism also, like this, يا شباب. Okay, so we have like some types of bacteria, because bacteria, archaea, yeast, all of them can perform like cellular respiration, okay? Some of them are prokaryotes, the cellular respiration takes place within the cytoplasm, but eukaryotes, the cellular respiration takes place in the mitochondria, okay? In the eukaryotes. طيب, so here يا شباب, in the absence of oxygen, some organisms and some types of cells, like the muscle cells inside us, okay, they can perform fermentation. They can perform fermentation, which means the glycolysis continue. It's an anaerobic process, allow glycolysis to continue. Okay, shabab, glycolysis to happen, for glycolysis to keep going, glycolysis continue in the absence of oxygen to produce what?
ATP.
Excellent, ya Hazim, to produce ATP. This is simply the fermentation. We have like, it's divided into two processes, but this is the main point, the main idea, the fermentation, which is the anaerobic process which allow glycolysis to continue.
Glycolysis to keep going. That means making ATP where there is no oxygen. And while you won't make as much ATP in this process as you would aerobic cellular respiration,
It thinks what? And I always love fermentation because my options are seriously limited. Okay.
you can't be too picky when oxygen isn't around. Okay, so recall what glycolysis is from our cellular respiration video. In glycolysis, you take glucose, a sugar.
Who can you, Shabab, tell me, remind me about the process of glycolysis? What is happening in the glycolysis? What happens in the glycolysis? I'm gonna choose some of you. I mean, Riyadh.
Yes, mister.
Yes. Do you know what is glycolysis?
Uh, I forget actually.
Okay, طيب listen to your friends because I'm gonna ask you again later. Ali Mazen.
Yes, here.
Hello Ali, how are you?
Fine, thank you.
طيب do you remember glycolysis? What does it mean?
No.
Okay, listen and concentrate يا علي. بدر بهلال.
Okay.
Yes, I know what
Yes.
it means. It
Yes.
splits two 3-carbon molecules into two,
Uh,
yes, two ATP molecules.
Can you say it again? It splits what?
It splits two 3-carbon molecules into two ATP molecules.
What before 2,3 carbon molecule?
Glucose.
Yes, exactly. So the splitting of glucose into 2 pyruvate, generally,
Yes.
okay?
Yes, I remembered
So
it.
thanks Badr. طيب Ali, can you say it again? The like splitting of glucose into 2 pyruvate that we talked before in the cellular respiration. Okay, Ali? Please say it.
Splitting?
Sorry?
Didn't hear him very well.
I hear nothing, Ali. I barely can hear you. Say it again, please. Huh? I cannot hear you. علي مازن يا علي مازن أين أنت؟ طيب أحمد أبو عين.
Yes, mister.
Yes. Can you say what do you mean by glycolysis?
It splits glucose into two 3-carbon molecules.
Yes.
And also it makes two molecules of ATP.
Yes.
And it takes place in the cell cytoplasm and it does not need, and it's anaerobic.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thanks. Okay. So يا شباب, as you said, all of you. Okay, Ali Mazin, no problem. Okay, so the glycolysis, the process of glycolysis, which is the glucose, when it splits down into 2 pyruvate, one molecule of glucose will be split down into 2 pyruvate. This splitting down can release 2 NADH and 2 ATP. This is the glycolysis that we took it before. Okay, let's continue يا شباب. شباب صح يا شباب لو سمحت. الناس اللي لسه نايمه صح. الناس اللي مشيت تيجي. اوكي؟ صحي معايا جو؟
يس يا مستر يس معاك.
مصحصح يعني؟
كنت بس بوصل معاه.
اوكي طيب listen يا شباب.
And it gets converted into pyruvate. This takes a little ATP cost to actually start it up, but overall, per glucose, you make 2 net ATP molecules, and you also produce 2 NADH.
Okay, Shabab, so this is the process of glycolysis, breaking down or splitting of the glucose into 2 pyruvate, producing 2 ATP molecules, and releasing 2 NADH, which are electron carrier and energy carrier. Okay, Shabab? So like it's change ADP into ATP, which means it releases energy to ATP. It releases 2 NADH. Okay, how? By like converting NADP plus into NADH. NADH, it's an electron carrier, like FADH2 electron carrier, like NADPH electron carrier. But here ATP, which is energy carrier. Okay, Shabab? Energy carrier. طيب.
Recall that NADH is a coenzyme and an electron carrier. We also need to mention that NADH didn't just poof appear as a product. No, because NAD plus actually was reduced to NADH when it gained electrons. And if the words reduced and oxidized are confusing, you can remember the famous Leo Gurr mnemonic. Lose electrons oxidized, gained electrons reduced. So NADH to NAD plus is oxidation because it loses electrons, and NAD plus to NADH is reduction because it gains electrons. Now, NADH, the electron carrier, would normally be delivering the electrons gained to the electron transport chain, if this was aerobic cellular respiration. Once losing their electrons, NADH would be oxidized into NAD+ and be ready to be involved all over again in glycolysis. But there's no electron transport chain in this fermentation process, so we've got to regenerate the NAD+ somehow. NAD+ is needed here, after all, for glycolysis to continue. Fermentation, therefore, adds another little step to the end of glycolysis, a step to help regenerate NAD+. This happens because fermentation allows NADH to give its electrons to an electron acceptor, which, in the two fermentation examples we are going to give, will either be a derivative of pyruvate or pyruvate itself. So here we go with two types of fermentation, which both result in different products from pyruvate. Alcoholic fermentation.
Right. Let's talk about the two types of fermentation. This is important. Okay. So the fermentation, we know that it's an anaerobic process that allow glycolysis to continue. We will talk about the first one, which is alcoholic fermentation. Alcoholic come from the word alcohol. Okay. So it's obvious for everyone. Maybe like we can find alcohol that come out from this process. Okay. So let's concentrate. Alcoholic fermentation
is done by some types of yeast. So first glycolysis happens, which yields 2 net ATP, 2 pyruvate, and 2 NADH. Now we need this step to regenerate the NAD+, so we can keep doing glycolysis. The 2 pyruvate is used, which will
Okay, Mahmoud Al-Khawri. Okay, so try to fix your problem, the internet. Try to restart the router, try to do something to fix the internet that you have.
ultimately produce carbon dioxide and 2-ethanol, alcohol. But the derivative of pyruvate shown here, acetaldehyde, can act as an electron acceptor in this process, so the 2-NADH can be oxidized to 2-NAD+, so that glycolysis can start all over. Since alcohol is a waste product in this process, this is why many yeast are used to produce alcoholic products.
Okay, so the first one, which is alcoholic fermentation. Alcoholic fermentation. We have like two kinds, but in the book they are like the first one, lactic acid fermentation, and the second one, alcoholic fermentation. Alcoholic fermentation takes place in some organisms like yeast. Yeast. Okay, shabab, that we used in the bread to make pizza. Okay, this is the yeast which make the dough to rise, make the bread to rise. Okay, because of the carbon dioxide that is like produced from the alcoholic fermentation. So alcoholic fermentation can produce alcohol to alcohol molecule, which is in ethanol. It's not important to mention this name. To alcohol and to carbon dioxide. Okay, from what? From pyruvate. From 2-pyruvate, sorry. Okay, so 2-pyruvate, which is glucose, which is what? Glucose, can produce alcohol and 2 carbon dioxide, 2 alcohol and 2 carbon dioxide. Okay, shabab, by taking energy, which means by changing NADH, sorry, into NAD+, removing electron for them. Okay, it takes the electron and releasing carbon dioxide and alcohol. So this is the first one, take place in the yeast. Take place in the yeast. Okay, shabab, and also some types of bacteria.
In this process, this is why many yeast are used to produce alcoholic products. Yeast also can do alcoholic fermentation in making bread, and the carbon dioxide product we mentioned is involved with helping the bread rise. The tiny amount of alcohol produced in the short fermenting time of bread will evaporate in the baking process. Lactic acid fermentation is done by cells such as your muscle cells, for example. While your muscle cells can do done by
the second type, which is what? Lactic acid fermentation. Okay, of course, after glycolysis, let's continue. So we have the second step, which is making pyruvate, and the pyruvate, shabab, will change into lactic acid to lactic acid. This is taking place in the muscle cell that you, in your muscle cell. For example, if you have like workout, if you make intense exercises and there is no enough oxygen for you, yes, you're still breathing. But this oxygen, it's enough for normal activity. What about if you go to the gym and play push-ups and play like a lot of exercises and so on? You need too much oxygen, okay, to make ATP, to release energy, to exercise well, to do a lot of exercises. But actually, because you cannot take enough oxygen for all of these activities, so you have another source of energy by making fermentation, which is lactic acid fermentation. The glucose inside your cytoplasm, inside your muscle cell, will make lactic acid fermentation to produce energy, okay, and to like produce like a and also two lactic acid, two molecules of lactic acid. Let's see this, Shabab.
Cells such as your muscle cells, for example. Well, your muscle cells can do aerobic cellular respiration. They can shift to lactic acid fermentation if they experience an oxygen debt. This could happen if you're working out very intensely, where your blood is unable to deliver a sufficient amount of oxygen to them for their demand. Just like alcoholic fermentation, we start with glycolysis, that yields the 2-net ATP, 2-pyruvate, and 2-NADH. But now we need this step to regenerate the NAD+, and this step is a bit different from alcoholic fermentation. The 2-pyruvate on the reactant side will ultimately yield 2-lactate. The pyruvate can act.
Okay, Shabab, simply 2-pyruvate will be 2-lactate or 2-lactic acid. That's it. Okay.
Act as an electron acceptor, allowing NADH to be oxidized to NAD+, so that glycolysis can start all over. By the way, this lactate product, or specifically its other form, lactic acid, has often been blamed for the muscle soreness that occurs after intense exercise.
Okay, so can you hear this? Can you see this? This is the muscle soreness. What the meaning of muscle soreness? Do you know, Shabab, like the burning of muscles that you can find after doing intense exercises? You feel something like burning inside your muscle. Who feel this before, Shabab? Did you feel it before? Burning in the muscles after like a lot of exercises?
Yes,
Of course.
yes.
This is because of what? Because of the lactic acid. Because of what? The lactic acid. Okay?
In many of my teaching years, this was often discussed, but there's some recent research that may contradict that. Science is so cool. Check out our further reading suggestions and our video details to learn more. Lactic acid fermentation is also done by bacteria that are involved in making yogurt.
Another thing, ya shabab, some types of bacteria can use lactic acid fermentation in the absence of what? Oxygen. Absence of what? Oxygen. To make what? To make the yogurt.
Lactic acid fermentation is also done by bacteria.
Okay. So this is fermentation like done by the bacteria that are involved in making yogurt and lactic acid.
Bacteria that are involved in making yogurt, and lactic acid can contribute to its sour taste. So overall, fermentation is a pretty remarkable process. Although, it does make us appreciate oxygen. Because despite how absolutely awesome...
Okay, Shabab. So here the fermentation, which is release a small amount of what? Of ATP, but cellular respiration can release a high amount, like a bus, release high amount of energy. One molecule of glucose in cellular respiration can release from 36 to 38 molecules of ATP, but the fermentation just only 2. Okay, Shabab? But this process requires oxygen, which is cellular respiration, but fermentation does not require oxygen.
Fermentation may be, it just can't make as much ATP as aerobic cellular respiration. Well, that's it.
Thanks, Amiba sister, for this. Okay, so let's continue, Shabab, in the book to see what's important things. We said, Shabab, if you didn't send the homework, send it to me right now about formative assessment for point 5. Who can tell me, Shabab, what the meaning of fermentation? I gotta choose it, Shabab. Ahmed Salim. Can you hear me, Ahmed Salim?
Yes, Mr.
Yes. Do you know what is fermentation?
Fermentation.
If you don't know, say I don't know. No problem. But you have to listen carefully. Huh? Think about it. طيب, listen to Ahmed Abu Ain. Ahmed Abu Ain. وين راح أحمد أبو عين؟
Yes, mister. Fermentation is an anaerobic process that allows glycolysis to continue.
Excellent.
Sorry, I was muted.
Anaerobic process.
Yes.
And you said before anaerobic, which means it does not require oxygen, that allow glycolysis to continue. So the glycolysis takes place to produce 2-pyruvate. In the presence of oxygen, the cellular respiration will take place in the mitochondria. But in the absence of oxygen, so the fermentation will occur, and also in the cytoplasm. Okay, Shabab? Okay, Ahmed Salim?
Okay, Mister.
Okay, fermentation does not make ATP, but allow glycolysis to continue. Fermentation removes electron from NADH molecule and recycle the NAD plus molecule for
You know that
glycolysis.
fermentation has two
Yes.
lactic acid and
Yes, two types of fermentation.
alcoholic fermentation.
Like two types of fermentation, ya shabab. We have lactic acid fermentation and the other one, which is alcoholic fermentation. Type here, they are different in the products and the place where they happen, where they done. So for example, lactic acid fermentation, we will take a place in the muscle cell. Here, the glycolysis, this is the first part to make 2-pyruvate, releasing to ATP and to NADPH. Type, by continuing glycolysis in certain cells or in certain organism, so the pyruvate will continue into 2-lactic acid. So the products here is 2-lactic acid, and by taking the electron from NADH, okay, and recycle the NADH into NADP plus and move it to the first step. So read this one, the first paragraph, the first one. Abdullah Hazim Hassouna. Can you hear me? Abdullah Hazim Hassouna. Basil Osama.
Yes, Mr. I'm here.
Yes.
Yes, I'm here.
Yes. Can you read number 1?
Okay. Pyruvate and NADH from glycolysis enter the fermentation process. 2 NADH molecules provide energy to convert pyruvate into lactic acid. As the NADH is used, it is converted back to NAD+.
Thank you so much. Right. So, Shabab, the first step, which is when the pyruvate and NADH from glycolysis, okay, pyruvate and NADH, this one, from glycolysis, okay, like in your muscle cells, okay. So in the absence of oxygen, Shabab, so the pyruvate will change into 2-lactic acid, okay, and releasing what NAD plus, which go back to the first step to make the glycolysis take place again. So this process, the importance of this process to make the glycolysis keep going, to make the glycolysis keep going, to make the glycolysis keep going. When the glycolysis keep going, it will produce what? 2 ATP. So as a result, in one lactic acid fermentation, so we have like 2 ATP from the glycolysis. Another lactic acid fermentation, 2 ATP from glycolysis. Okay, Shabab? So this process to make the glycolysis to continue take place in which cell? In your muscle cells. The burning in your muscle cells that you feel after intense exercises, this is from the lactic acid. And also some organisms can make lactic acid fermentation, like some bacteria. Okay, so here we have another example, I think. Quietly broken down. Yes, we have like in some bacteria, so to make yogurt. Like anyway, this is the first step, lactic acid fermentation. The second stage, which is in some organisms and yeast and some bacteria, yes, we have like the alcoholic fermentation. Alcoholic fermentation, Shabab, also the glycolysis takes place to produce 2 ATP and 2 pyruvate. In certain organisms and certain like cells, certain unicellular organism like yeast and some bacteria and so on. So the glycolysis continue and alcohol produced. So this is called alcoholic fermentation. The production here, so the products here are 2 alcohol, 2 carbon dioxide, 2 CO2, 2 alcohol. Okay, Shabab? So, very important thing to mention, the products of alcoholic fermentation and the product of lactic acid fermentation, they are different. This is it's a good point to mention, Shabab. You have to memorize this. Two lactic acid from lactic acid fermentation, and two alcohol from alcoholic fermentation with two carbon dioxide. This carbon dioxide that we see it in the bread, that make the bread like rise, that make the dough to rise, the dough, العجينة تخليها to rise. Okay? طيب this take place because of what? Yeast. We know that, okay? Single celled organism, the yeast, in the absence of oxygen, if you put the yeast with the dough, لما بتحطي شباب بالعربي الخميرة مع العجين, okay? طبعا in the absence of oxygen, it will make alcoholic fermentation to release alcohol and carbon dioxide. ما حدش عايز يسألني سؤال يا شباب في الحتة دي؟
Mr. The alcoholic fermentation takes place in the cytoplasm, right?
Yes. In another question?
No, Mr. Thank you.
طيب حدش يا شباب حابب يسألني على حاجة تانية؟ فكر كده. الالكوهوليك fermentation يا شباب release what? Releases what? ها who can say? أحمد الحداد، عادل ياسر، عبد الله زبيدي. فين الشباب؟
يا مستر.
Yes.
Read.
Yes, عادل. Alcoholic fermentation can produces what? Produces what?
What?
What are the products of alcoholic fermentation? What are the products of alcoholic fermentation? This is alcoholic fermentation. What are the products? We have here what? Two? Huh?
Releases carbon dioxide.
Two alcohol and two carbon dioxide. Right يا شباب؟ اوكي؟
اوكي.
الناس نايمه ليه يا شباب؟ طيب احنا الكربون دايوكسيد بيعمل ايه يا شباب في العجين في الدو؟ بيعمل له ايه؟ رايز.
يس.
هو الكربون دايوكسيد بس اللي بيطلع ولا في حاجه تطلع معاه؟
هو الالكحول.
الالكحول صح؟ يعني احنا لما بنيجي ناكل خبز دلوقتي بنسكر؟
لا.
طب ما حدش سالني ليه كده؟
ايه؟
الناس ما سالتش ليه؟ الالكحول يا مستر، احنا لما بناكل خبز كده واحنا كده بنشرب خمره مثلا، نشرب الكحول؟
لا.
عشان
لا الالكحول بيروح هو الكربون دايوكسيد.
هو هيروح مع الكربون دايوكسيد.
ويست برودكت يا مستر.
نعم حازم.
It's waste product Mr. Waste product. It goes out.
It's go down.
It's
طيب
go
بص.
out Mr. It's waste product.
It's go out. طيب بص يا شباب كده. Can you read this? Where is it? طيب read this يا حازم.
The alcohol that is produced during fermentation evaporates into the air.
الحمد لله evaporate in the air. تمام؟ يعني الخبز اللي انت بتاكله يا شباب ما فيهوش الكحول ولا حاجه. تمام؟ طيب شباب so this is everything about fermentation. A simple lesson, easy lesson. All of the lesson like which is a three words, fermentation, the definition, the two types, alcoholic fermentation, lactic acid fermentation. And the importance of fermentation, we need it in what? Okay, here يا شباب also bacteria can make alcoholic fermentation. Okay, also because like bacteria, some of them live in our intestine, live in digestive tract, and there is no oxygen inside. Okay, so they must obtain their ATP from anaerobic process when the oxygen is unavailable. Okay, Shabab, if they cannot live normally inside our intestine without oxygen, so they cannot help us in digestion. Subhanallah, ya Shabab, Allah yani create bacteria and this bacteria inside our body to help us in digestion. Okay, this is everything ya Shabab about today. Yani I hope you enjoyed this simple lesson. Don't forget to do the formative assessment and send it to me with the previous one If you didn't send the previous one, send it to me on WhatsApp. Any question يا شباب in this lesson?
No, sir.
No, Mr. Adil.
No questions? طيب هسأل سؤال على الطاير بسرعة كده. علاء محمد, can you hear me?
Yes, Mr. I'm here.
طيب, what is the products of lactic acid fermentation? What are the products of lactic acid fermentation? علاء?
Yes, Mr.
Yes, what are the products? Sorry?
What's the question again?
What are the products of lactic acid fermentation? Huh? This is what on the board?
Carbon dioxide, I think.
No, lactic acid. Huh? Lactic acid fermentation يا شباب can release 2 lactic acid and NDB+. Alcoholic fermentation can release 2 alcohol, 2 carbon dioxide, and of course recycle NADP+. Thanks guys, this is everything. I hope you enjoyed this lesson and have a nice day. مع السلامة.